I used to believe that peace was the same thing as happiness. My life was quiet, measured in the rhythm of keystrokes, the hum of my computer, and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I worked from home as a freelance editor, spending hours polishing the words of other people's stories while mine remained unwritten. My apartment was small, but enough for me and my boyfriend, Marcus. We'd been together for 3 years, though lately I wasn't sure what together really meant. He was the kind of man who filled a room with ease, confident and unshakable. When we met, his laugh had been contagious, his attention magnetic, but over time, something between us had dulled, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Our conversations were shorter, our silences longer. He stayed late at work often, coming home smelling faintly of coffee and exhaustion. I didn't ask questions, and he didn't offer explanations. We lived beside each other, not with each other. That night, the one that changed everything, began like any other. The air was heavy with summer humidity. The sky outside my window throbbed with slow, distant thunder. Marcus had texted an hour earlier, staying over at Ben's. Early meeting tomorrow. I just typed OK and placed my phone face down on a nightstand. The glow from the screen felt like a lie I didn't have the strength to challenge. I spent the next few hours editing a client's manuscript, trying to lose myself in someone else's words. But the power cut out just before midnight. Sudden, sharp, swallowing the hum of my room in a breathless silence. The ceiling fan stilled. The monitor went black. For a moment, I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen, feeling like a ghost caught in my own apartment. I got up and went to the window. The neighborhood was dim except for one working streetlight down the road. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavier, slanting sideways under the yellow light. That's when I saw him. He stood across the street, under that lone streetlight, holding a black umbrella. The way the light cut across his face made it hard to see his features clearly, but something about his stillness caught me. He wasn't on his phone, not rushing anywhere, just standing there, watching the rain like it meant something. Our eyes met for a second, and something inside me stirred, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet awareness, a spark. I don't know if he noticed, but before I could look away, he raised a hand slightly, as if acknowledging me from a distance. Then the thunder cracked close enough to shake the window, and the rain came harder. A minute later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, he was there, soaked around the edges, umbrella dripping onto the mat. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice low and even. "You've lost power too, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah, whole block, I think." He smiled faintly. "I've got a spare flashlight. Figured I'd share. New neighbor etiquette." He extended it toward me, and for a second, I hesitated before taking it. His hand was warm despite the rain. "Thanks," I said. "I'm Caleb." "Jared," he replied, "moved in across the street last week." There was a silence, comfortable, somehow, and I found myself saying, "You can come in if you want, until the storm slows." He stepped inside, brushing water from his hair. Up close, he looked effortlessly composed, messy brown hair, a week's worth of stubble, eyes that didn't seem to hurry. He glanced around, his gaze landing on the book stacked unevenly by the couch. "You read a lot," he said. "I work with words." I answered, "It comes with the curse." He laughed, a soft, genuine sound. "Better than my job. I'm a graphic designer. I mostly stare at a screen and pretend I'm creative." The conversation drifted easily. We talk about insomnia, bad weather, and the strange silence that falls when power cuts out. It was strange how quickly I felt at ease with him. With Marcus, silence had become a punishment. With Jared, it felt like a pause between two people learning each other's rhythm. At one point, lightning flashed close enough to light the room, and Jared winced. "I've hated storms since I was a kid," he admitted. "Too many nights hiding under blankets, waiting for them to pass." Without thinking, I said, "You can wait here until it's over." He hesitated, then nodded. "If you don't mind." I wouldn't have offered if I did. I handed him a towel, and he sat on the couch, running it through his hair. The smell of rain clung to him, something raw and clean that filled the quiet space between us. I sat across from him, Flashlight balanced on the coffee table, throwing narrow bands of light across his face. "Marcus isn't home?" he asked, glancing toward the empty hallway. I shook my head. "Work trip. He's gone a lot lately." "I get it," Jared said softly, like he really did. "Being alone can start to sound louder than the storm outside." That line sat between us for a while, unspoken and heavy. There was nothing romantic yet, just something human, familiar, almost dangerous in its gentleness. We kept talking until the rain eased. I learned he'd grown up in Portland, moved here for work. Didn't know many people yet. I told him I grew up here, never left, and sometimes wished I had. He smiled and said, "Maybe you just need a reason." When the thunder faded, he stood, folding his umbrella. "Thanks for the shelter, Caleb, and the company." I followed him to the door. "Anytime," I said, meaning it more than I should have. He gave me one last look before stepping into the damp air. "Get some sleep," he said with a grin. "You look like someone who forgets how." After he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The room felt different, warmer somehow, though the power hadn't come back yet. I turned off the flashlight and let the dark wrap around me. When I finally lay down, I couldn't stop hearing his voice or seeing that moment under the streetlight. Something in me had shifted, small but undeniable. I didn't know what it meant, only that I wouldn't sleep the same again. And as I closed my eyes, I thought, maybe peace isn't happiness after all. Maybe it's just a pause before something wakes you up. The morning after the storm, sunlight poured through the blinds like a quiet apology. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and coffee. When I walked into the living room, Jared was gone, but on the coffee table sat a folded note weighted down by the flashlight he'd lent me. "Thanks for the warmth, Caleb. You have a quiet kind of soul. Jay." I read it twice, then 3 more times. Something about his handwriting, neat but uneven, as if written in a rush, felt personal in a way that unsettled me. I left the note there all morning, unable to throw it away. Marcus came home later that afternoon, keys jingling as if to announce his arrival. He kissed my cheek absently, his lips cool, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Power's back," he said, opening the fridge, then closing it again. "You good?" "Yeah," I answered automatically. The words sounded strange in my mouth. He scrolled through his phone as he leaned against the counter. "Ben says the meeting went late. We might have to travel next week." "Right," I said. I wanted to tell him about the blackout, about Jared, about how someone I'd barely met felt more present than the man standing in front of me. But I didn't. The distance between us had become a kind of unspoken contract. Days drifted by in their usual pattern. Work, silence, the sound of Marcus on the phone in the other room. But Jared lingered in my mind like a line from a book I couldn't stop rereading. 3 evenings later, I ran into him by the lake while out for a walk. The water reflected a pink-orange sky, and he was sitting on the railing, earbuds in, tapping his fingers on his thigh. When he noticed me, his face lit up in a way that startled me. "Hey," he said, pulling one earbud out. "Didn't think I'd run into my storm buddy again." "Guess the universe likes reruns," I said, smiling before I could stop myself. We talked as the light faded. The easy kind of conversation that doesn't require thinking. He told me about his new job, the chaos of deadlines, the emptiness of his apartment. I told him I'd lived here all my life, but never really felt like I belonged. When he laughed, it wasn't loud, just soft and genuine. He had that rare ability to listen without making you feel examined. When we finally said goodbye, he said, "You should come by sometime. I make decent coffee and terrible pancakes." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, its slow rotation slicing through the darkness. Marcus was beside me, already asleep. I wanted to reach for him, to feel something familiar, but the space between us might as well have been miles. I turned away, pretending not to notice the ache blooming quietly in my chest. The next day, Jared texted me for the first time. "Rain again. You hiding under blankets or working through it?" "Both," I replied. He sent a laughing emoji, then, "Come over. I'll trade you coffee for stories." I told myself it was harmless. Just coffee. Just a neighbor. But I also knew that I had started checking my phone more often than I should. Jared's apartment was small and alive. Painted walls, mismatched furniture, a plant that looked half dead but stubbornly green. There was music playing low, the kind that fills silence without drowning it. "You live like someone who doesn't mind the mess," I said. He grinned. "Mess makes it real. You should see my desktop. It's chaos with purpose." I smiled, sitting across from him as he poured coffee into chipped mugs. He had that ease about him, every gesture unhurried, every glance warm. We talked for hours about art, loneliness, the strange exhaustion that comes from pretending you're fine. At one point, he asked, "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like you woke up one day and didn't recognize the person in your own mirror?" I hesitated. Every day. Our eyes met, and for a second, neither of us looked away. It wasn't flirtation exactly. It was recognition, the kind that makes your pulse stumble. When I got home, the apartment was dark again. Marcus was in the shower, his phone buzzing on the nightstand. The screen lit up a message from someone named Ben. "Still on for tomorrow night?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. He came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, hair dripping. "Hey," he said, smiling faintly. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said again because that was easier than no. He climbed into bed beside me, scrolling through his messages until the light from his phone blurred in my eyes. I turned away, pressing my face into the pillow. Over the next week, I saw Jared again, once at the corner cafe, once when he waved from across the street. Each time, it felt less like coincidence and more like gravity. There was something about him I couldn't shake. His calm, the way he seemed to see through small talk, the warmth that followed me long after we said goodbye. One evening, as the sky turned gray, he texted, "You look tired lately. Everything okay?" I typed and erased several replies before sending. "It's complicated." He replied almost instantly. "Sometimes complicated is just the beginning of honest." That line stayed with me for the rest of the night. I wanted to tell Marcus everything, to ask why we were still pretending. But when he came home late again, the smell of unfamiliar cologne on his shirt, I said nothing. The next morning, he left early for another meeting. I sat by the window, coffee cooling in my hands, watching Jared jog past on the opposite sidewalk. He caught my eye and smiled, a quick, effortless thing, but it hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I wasn't naive enough to call it love. It was something else, an awakening, maybe, or a reminder of what I'd stopped feeling. That night, I found myself rereading Jared's first note. "You have a quiet kind of soul." Maybe he saw something I'd forgotten existed. When I went to bed, Marcus wasn't home yet. The room felt vast, the air too still. I turned on my side, listening to the faint hum of the street outside. For the first time, I wondered if the silence in our home was really peace, or just the sound of something ending. I didn't have an answer, but as the night deepened and the rain started again, I knew one thing for certain. Something inside me had already shifted, and there was no going back. Marcus left for a work trip on a Wednesday morning. He kissed my forehead before walking out the door, a gesture that felt more like routine than affection. "I'll be gone 3 days," he said, adjusting his tie. "Try not to burn the place down." I managed a small laugh, but when the door clicked shut, the apartment exhaled with me. The silence was different this time, not heavy, not empty, but waiting. Jared texted me that afternoon. "Rain again. Guess it's our kind of weather." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Coffee later?" "Always," he wrote. When I arrived at his apartment, the sky was bruised with clouds, a storm swelling in the distance. Jared opened the door in a soft gray shirt and that easy smile that always seemed to disarm me. "You brought the weather with you," he said. "Maybe it just follows me now." I replied, stepping inside. The smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the small space. Music played quietly from a speaker, something slow and melodic. Jared's apartment felt warmer than mine ever did, cluttered but alive. He handed me a mug, and for a while, we just sat there, talking about nothing and everything, the kind of conversation that feels like a bridge between two lonely shores. At one point, he asked, "You ever think about what makes people stay in relationships that stop working?" I hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of my cup. Fear, maybe. Or habit. Sometimes it's just easier to be unhappy with someone than alone. He nodded thoughtfully. That's honest. It's also pathetic, I said quietly. Not pathetic, he replied. Human. The rain started then, harder, steadier, pressing against the windows. The power flickered once, then steadied again. We both looked up at the same moment, and when our eyes met, something shifted in the air. The silence wasn't uncomfortable this time. It pulsed, alive with something unspoken. He set his mug down and leaned back on the couch. You look like you haven't breathed in a while, he said softly. I laughed under my breath. Maybe I forgot how. He studied me for a moment, then said, You don't have to keep pretending, Caleb. I looked at him, trying to hide the tremor in my chest. Pretending what? That you're fine, that you're still where you belong. I wanted to argue, to push the thought away, but I couldn't. Every word he said was a truth I'd been avoiding. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, but even in my own ears, it sounded weak. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on mine. Then tell me I'm wrong. I couldn't. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sound of rain filled the space between us. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand hovering near mine. I didn't pull away. Our fingers touched lightly, barely there, but enough to send a pulse of warmth through me. It wasn't lust that stirred in that moment. It was recognition, a reminder of what connection could feel like when it wasn't hollow. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through confusion. When I opened them, he was still looking at me, his expression soft but unreadable. I shouldn't be here, I whispered. You are here, he said, voice quiet but certain. The thunder cracked outside, close enough to rattle the glass. I stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. My heart was loud in my ears. Marcus doesn't deserve this, I said, more to myself than to him. Jared stood too, keeping a careful distance. You're not doing anything wrong, he said. Not yet. Yet, I repeated, the word stinging. He stepped closer, his voice lower now. Caleb, I'm not asking you for anything. I see you, and I don't think you felt seen in a long time. Something in me broke then, not in a violent way, but in that quiet, irreversible way a dam gives way to water. I turned to face him, my throat tight. You shouldn't say things like that. Why? He asked. Because they're true? The distance between us disappeared in an instant. His face was inches from mine, close enough that I could feel the rhythm of his breath. I could have stepped back, could have stopped the moment before it became something else. But I didn't. Then I did. At the last second, I turned away, running a hand over my face. I can't, I said, voice barely steady. Jared exhaled softly. I know. He sat back down, resting his elbows on his knees. Then at least don't lie to yourself about what you want. The rain softened outside, but inside me, the storm hadn't stopped. When I finally left his apartment, the night air was cool and damp. I walked home in silence, the streetlights blurring through the drizzle. My heart felt heavy, full of something I didn't know how to name. When I opened the door to my apartment, Marcus's shoes were by the door. He wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. He was sitting on the couch, phone in his hand, his expression unreadable. My stomach dropped. Hey, I said cautiously. Hey, he echoed. He held up his phone. You left it unlocked on the table yesterday. The air between us turned sharp. He scrolled once, then looked at me. Who's Jared? My mouth went dry. A neighbor. He laughed quietly, a sound without humor. A neighbor who texts you about rain, who writes you notes about your soul? Marcus, it's not what you think. He stood slowly, setting the phone down. Then tell me what I should think. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. There was no good version of the truth, only pain waiting to happen. He looked at me for a long time before saying, I didn't think you'd be the one to do this. Do what? I asked, though I already knew. Disappear, he said simply, while still standing in front of me. He walked past me toward the door, grabbing his jacket from the hook. For a second, I thought he might turn around, might say something that would make it all fixable, but he didn't. The door closed behind him, The sound soft but final. I stood there for a long time, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a message from Jared. "Did you make it home safe?" I didn't reply. I sat on the edge of the couch, the same couch where Marcus and I had once laughed until midnight, where Jared and I had almost crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost cruel. I had wanted something to change. Now it had, and as I sat there in the quiet, I realized I had no idea what I'd just lost or what I'd set in motion. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against my window. The morning felt heavy, drenched in a silence that pressed against my chest. Last night's confrontation replayed in my head like a film I couldn't stop watching. Blake's trembling voice, my disbelief, the quiet collapse of everything I thought was real. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the ceiling. The words, "I didn't mean to hurt you," echoed in my head, and I wonder if anyone ever truly meant to. Maybe betrayal wasn't born from cruelty, but from weakness. The inability to face loneliness, to choose honesty over comfort. Still, knowing that didn't make the pain any easier to bear. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, the apartment felt colder, emptier. The smell of Blake's cologne still lingered faintly in the air, ghost-like and cruel. I walked to the kitchen, made coffee I barely touched, and scrolled aimlessly through my phone, his name flashing across old messages, each one feeling like a relic from another lifetime. A part of me wanted to delete everything, erase him from my memory entirely. But I couldn't. The truth was, even after all that happened, some stubborn part of me still cared. Love, once it takes root, doesn't just vanish. It lingers in the smallest details. In a song, a scent, the way morning light hits the floor. By noon, I found myself outside, walking aimlessly through the drizzle. The air smelled like wet earth and regret. Every step felt like I was trying to walk away from something that still clung to me. My thoughts kept circling back to that night. The look in his eyes, the way his voice cracked when he said he was sorry. I didn't know if it was guilt, love, or both. As I crossed the park, I saw him, Blake, standing under the old oak tree where we used to meet after work. His hair was damp, his shoulders tense. For a moment, neither of us moved. Time seemed to stop, just the rain, the wind, and two people caught between love and loss. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "I didn't think you'd be here," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. He took a hesitant step closer. "I just needed to see you. I know I can't undo what I did, but I needed to say this in person." His voice was steady, but his eyes told a different story. Red, exhausted, broken. I could see the guilt, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. "I should have told you about Ryan," he continued. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I didn't plan it. He stopped, swallowed hard. "I got scared of losing myself, and somehow I ended up losing you." For a moment, I didn't speak. I wanted to shout, to ask him why he had to destroy something that was finally beginning to feel right. But instead, I just looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that he wasn't the same person I had fallen for. Maybe I wasn't either. "You can't fix this," I said finally. "Some things, once they break, they don't go back the same way." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I loved you. I still do." The words hit me like a wave, painful, familiar, true, but they came too late. "I loved you too," I whispered. And maybe that's the hardest part. We stood there in silence, rain slipping down our faces like it was trying to wash away the past. Eventually, Blake turned and walked away, his figure fading into the gray mist. I didn't stop him this time. I let him go, not out of anger, but acceptance. When I got home, the apartment didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like a space waiting to be reclaimed. I opened the window, let the air in, and sat by my desk. My journal was still open from last night. On the last page, I had written one line. Something happened that changed everything. I picked up my pen and added, "But maybe that's how change works. It hurts first, and then it frees you." Weeks passed, and slowly I began to heal. The memories still came, but they no longer broke me. They just reminded me of how deeply I could feel and how much I had survived. Blake's chapter in my life closed quietly, without bitterness. We didn't speak again, but sometimes I'd see his name online, living, breathing, moving forward, just as I was. And maybe that's all love ever was meant to do. Teach us, wound us, shape us, and finally release us. That night, as I lay in bed once again, staring into the soft glow of the ceiling light, I thought back to the first night, the one that changed everything. Back then, I thought the change was about love finding me. Now, I understood it differently. The real change was me, learning to face what I feared most, losing someone and still being whole. The rain outside had stopped. The world was quiet again. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "I'll be okay." And for the first time in a long while, I truly believed it.